I practiced Ashtanga for 5 years, perfecting every pose, and felt defeated. Then, after this one simple shift, I unlocked more progress than in the last 5 years combined. I'm Sushmita, but you can call me Sushi, and I've been teaching this exact approach inside my Yoga Mastery program, and it's helped my students unlock new breakthroughs literally every single time they stepped on the mat. If you want the full framework, there is a link in the description below. But in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the core principle that you need to focus on in order to unlock consistent progress and enjoy the journey again. So let's dive right in. When you see others in a class float effortlessly in sun salutations or jump back or bind or hold a handstand, you just start to try and master every single one of these in your next Ashtanga practice. And you're trying to nail the jump backs, you're trying to hold that handstand, you're trying to do all of these things all at once. And instead of feeling progress, it just feels overwhelming. And I know this because I've been there, and sometimes the Ashtanga Yoga practice can feel like climbing a mountain. The primary series alone is so long, it's so demanding, and that's only the starting point. Trust me, it just gets harder and stranger till you're questioning why you're spending like months trying to put both your legs behind your head, and then you're like, did I get into the wrong thing? And a lot of us are kind of drawn to this structured practice because of its promise of being this movement meditation. But our approach to it kind of has to change if we want to find the joy in the practice again. Because every single time you unroll your mat and you have this intention of, I'm going to finally bind in Marichasana D, or I'm going to finally like jump back and not plop down. And each of these times that you kind of set this intention that's very physical, you're climbing this mountain and it becomes a source of like immense pressure instead of like a joy of taking a hike. And you're wondering why you're still wobbling out of Utthita Hasta even though it's been months since you started your practice. And if you're one of those people that's not able to quite like break that plateau of progress that you've made and you don't know what to do next, then you need to hear this, because I remember this time in my own practice when I was obsessed with 𝗠cie 𝗿𝗶𝗲. And for those of you who know this pose, it's basically this intense pose where you put your legs behind your head and you try and grab your hands while your ankles are crossed above your head and you're kind of like in this tortoise position. And it was considered like a gatekeeper for the rest of the series. And for me, it was really, truly like just a symbol of my failure. I was born quite flexible, but every single day I stepped on the mat and I fought with my body. I tried to twist it into this pretzel. I noticed myself just holding my breath, and I'd finish my practice not feeling peaceful or calm or purified or any of those things, but I just feel like totally defeated. And I had to stop while the rest of the class would keep practicing. And that kind of hurt my ego, and I didn't like it because I was just like, I had to be quiet and not do what I thought I could do. And as someone who is born relatively flexible, it demanded more than just flexibility. And I was annoyed because I couldn't just, like use my youth or my flexibility to get into the shape. And I realized it was more than just flexibility, right? A lot of these Ashtanga poses are far more than just being flexible or being strong. And looking back, I just wish I could tell myself that, the physical practice is not everything, but that it's more than just perfecting technique. I was so focused on conquering this one single position that I was missing the entire point of the practice. All the other 90 minutes was just lost in trying to get to, 𝗠cie 𝗿𝗶𝗲 and not fail and not feel bad. And I would do way more sun salutations than I needed to just to warm up and like get ready for this fight. And I would rush to the standing poses because I'd done them so many times and it was almost like second nature. And by the time I got through the sitting poses, I would just be like bored and I would think of other things. But when I got close to 𝗠cie 𝗿𝗶𝗲, when I got close to that position, I would just hear this self-criticism in my head, because I knew that, from yesterday to today, not that much would have changed. And it's not like, I was deep diving into the anatomy and why I couldn't do it and things like this at this point. I was just kind of like, everything is about getting through this position so that, I don't have to sit down and look awkward while the rest of the class just went on. on. And even when I got to the closing sequence, after I felt defeated, I would just rush through it because I was so exhausted from feeling like a failure, and I didn't want to sit in that discomfort. I just wanted to move on with my day. And if you're a perfectionist, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, and you understand this journey of trying to achieve the perfect pose, because that's what we're rewarded in for the rest of our lives, right? And this kind of completely destroys our experience of the entire practice, because we end up turning this movement meditation into a daily performance review. We get so fixated on getting to the destination, to do the pose perfectly, to do that flawless posture so that it looks cool on Instagram, that we kind of make ourselves miserable for the entire journey, and we're cranky and we're grumpy, and we don't quite get the benefits of the practice. And we almost see that progress is like this straight line going up, and it's like every single day that we practice, we should feel better than the previous day, or we should be getting better, or like hitting a new personal best. But I can tell you this from experience and from seeing dozens of people go through the same exact sequence. This mindset, it's not even about the position, this mindset is the fastest way to burn out. It's the fastest way to quit Ashtanga or quit any style of yoga that consistently asks you to improve, because the way that you're practicing only adds this layer of tension and frustration, and you're doing the exact opposite of what yoga is meant to do, which is like get you calmer, get you more into a state of peacefulness and so on. And so we have to see that this pose, this thing that we're struggling with, isn't just like something to be avoided or something to be struggled against so that you can keep moving on. It's kind of part of the path. And if we're constantly at war with ourselves during this process, then we're blocking the very lessons that we need and that the practice is trying to teach us. So what do we do? If perfectionism is such a common trap in Ashtanga, and a lot of people that are drawn to Ashtanga themselves are like type A, people like you and me who want to get it right, then what do we actually do? We actually first have to understand what makes Ashtanga so unique and compare it to a style of like Vinyasa to see why we're drawn to this in the first place, and then what we can do about it. So if we look at a Vinyasa class, for example, the sequence is almost always different and it's creatively sequenced. The teacher puts a few postures together and you flow from one position to the next, and there's often cool music playing in the background, and it feels kind of like a dance, and the variety is what keeps you moving and keeps things fresh, and people love it for that reason. So you might do a certain pose on one day and then you might not see it again for a few weeks. But Ashtanga, on the other hand, it's all about structure. It's all about the same fixed sequence that you practice over and over and over again. And Surya Namaskar A, and then B, and then the standing sequence, and then seated sequence, and then the closing sequence. Now, this repetition is incredibly powerful because you don't have to think about what's coming next. Your mind is actually free to go deeper. You can turn your attention inward, you can focus on your breath, you can work with your bandhas, and all of these things kind of makes it like a movement meditation. And actually, it's a gift for busy minds like yours and mine, because it gives you a stable, predictable container that then kind of mirrors back to you where you are on any given day. But the same beautiful structure that we all talk about is amazing and why we are drawn to this practice in the first place can also become a double-edged sword because we're perfectionists too. And because the sequence is the same every single day, it becomes a very clear, sometimes also harsh measuring stick. And you know exactly where you struggled yesterday, the day before, the week before, the month before. And that same fixed sequence can go from becoming this movement meditation to almost like an exam to pass. And each pose then becomes this checkbox that you either pass or you fail. And especially when we practice with traditional teachers who give you a pose when you're ready, it then becomes all about that one pose that you're struggling with. And this is a world away from the Vinyasa experience because it's a varied class. It's harder to track like tiny bits of progress or even need to be like hung up about like every single problem pose that you're facing because the context is always changing. But in Ashtanga, because the consistency and the structure is the same, it almost shines this bright, unforgiving light on all of our shortcomings. So our ego then turns the very thing that's supposed to help us cultivate inner calm, that's supposed to be useful for us, this repetition, into another place of harsh self-judgment. And I've seen Ashtangis here in Mysore, where I am studying right now at the source. They like basically sit in cafes and they talk about like which pose they're struggling with, and it becomes more of like gymnastics or a sport rather than a tool to purify the body and mind. And so when people just end up talking about like what pose they're stuck with, then it kind of blurs what true progress is. And progress then becomes all about getting deeper into the pose or getting the new pose. And for me, that feels like such a limited view, because true progress isn't always visible. It's not always like through getting another shape, but it's actually about understanding ourselves through the process, and through not getting a posture, through struggling with the posture, we learn to work with ourselves and work with our limitations. And knowing our limitations is kind of the biggest tool, the biggest gift for our practice. So the structure of Ashtanga isn't actually the problem. It's our relationship to this structure that is the problem. And so we turn this like liberating, repetitive practice into a cage of its own. And so how do we actually turn that same structure, that thing that's so beneficial to us, into our advantage and like look at it differently? So the first thing to do is to actually look at it as this single intention. So the secret to unlocking more progress, instead of like doing this whole long sequence and then rushing that path that you struggle with, or like hiding away from your teacher when you know you can't do it, is to stop trying to master everything all at once. Instead of sprinting to the top of the mountain, we need to start focusing on taking the next well-placed, conscious step on this journey. And for me, this looks like actually the mental shift from trying to do everything perfectly to getting on your mat and just setting a single intention or setting a single goal for the practice. So every single day you get on the mat, all you have to do is set a single achievable goal for that day. And this isn't about lowering your standards or being sloppy with your practice. It's about channeling all your energy to try and master just one thing per practice. And so it's about shifting this mindset from conquering and doing to one of just being a curious explorer. And this is the only way that I've seen that people remain like students for the rest of their lives, instead of just being this harsh critic to their own bodies. Because as we age, it only gets harder. And when we have too many goals, too many things that we want to do with each practice, we can get overwhelmed and we basically freeze up. Because our focus scatters, we can't do what we can do if we just had a single target where all our energy then becomes laser focused towards that one single target. And both modern psychology and yogic science also tells us that breaking down goals into simpler, smaller, manageable chunks is the key to staying on track and avoiding burnout and all these things. But this practice in the yogic context is to send or create a single sankalpa or a single intention at the very start of your practice. And then this becomes your reason to practice, your reason to investigate these postures. And it gives your thoughts and your energy this single theme for the whole session. And this means that you're giving yourself permission to not be perfect at everything, to not get all your poses perfectly. But it means that you recognize that your energy, your body, and your focus will be different each and every time you practice. And depending on what you need that day, you can give yourself a specific intention. And it's okay to not do everything at once, because the goal isn't to have a perfect practice. It's to show up every single day with a clear, kind intention towards yourself and get something out of the practice and channel all your energy. And so the shift kind of takes the pressure off immediately. So the practice is no longer like this pass or fail test. It just becomes this kind of like laboratory for self-discovery. And when you're no longer at war with yourself, you then have space to actually work with real progress, and you allow that progress to happen instead of grasping after it. And you start to learn the language of your own body. You begin to understand that progress isn't just this linear path up the mountain, but it's also like found in gauging the quality of your breath, in working with the steadiness of your gaze, and also finding compassion towards yourself. And for me, this is real yoga. So what does this actually look like in your practice? What can you do tomorrow? I'm not saying focus on one asana every single day, because then that would mean, you do the same thing. You put all the pressure on building up to one asana, and then if that asana doesn't come right and you try a few times, you end up creating this vritti, creating this kind of negative experience around the asana. And then every time you do the asana, you just end up, adding that layer of negative experience that you have to overcome. So instead of choosing one asana, I want you to choose one theme for the entire session. So for example, instead of worrying about like perfect alignment for today, just maintain this equal, smooth breath for the entire session. So that's your goal. So you hear the ujjayi breath, even if your shapes aren't perfect. You notice, whenever you're gasping for air in sun salutations, and you come back to that single focus of maintaining your smooth, equal breath. And you can do this with different kinds of themes. Like one day you can focus on your foundation, you can notice where your hands and feet are, and in every single pose, you can consciously spread your fingers, you can ground down through your feet. And this little difference between worrying about a single position, which changes obviously, and rather just feeling the weight shift, feeling like the single intention bleed into all the poses, that then changes the way you practice in a sequence. And for me, this approach has changed everything because it turned my practice from a source of stress into a source of nourishment. It gives you freedom to explore within that structure. It allows you to be human, of course, because you can have good days and bad days. And also you can find value in every single practice, even if it doesn't look like you're doing your full practice that day, because you start to build a relationship with the practice based on curiosity and based on kindness, not based on judgment or force or just getting through it in the same way that you think you should be doing it every single day. And the ironic part is when you practice like this, you let go of trying to be perfect or getting the position, and you start to create the conditions for real lasting progress to happen, and it'll happen on its own. You'll start to unlock like shifts every single day. So remember that yoga practice is not something like that's a performance that you need to perfect. It's a process that needs to be experienced, and it's an exploration ultimately. And it's a mirror that reflects back to you not just your physical limits, but also your mental patterns of striving, of frustration, of judgment. And all of these things are really the gold of the practice. And true practice isn't about achieving the perfect handstand. I'm sure you know this by now. But it's about how you treat yourself. It's about what you do when you fall out of Udita Hasta. And instead of forcing yourself to finish everything, it's about cultivating patience when progress feels slow, or the days that you can't get yourself, to do all the things that you normally do. And it's that small victory of just showing up and having a simpler intention for yourself that day. So for your very next practice, just pick one goal for the entire practice, and then come back here and let me know in the comments below what your goal was and how that felt in your whole practice. I would love to hear about your experience, because sharing your journey helps all of us feel a little bit less alone in this complicated, difficult journey of Ashtanga Yoga. And if this message resonated with you in any way, and you are looking for ways to deepen your understanding of yoga beyond just the physical poses, there's a link in the description below to set up a call with me. So do that if you feel like you need a little bit guidance. But if you found this video helpful, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. We are a small channel, and I could really use the social validation to get the message out to more people. But thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for watching till the very end. I hope you have a lovely day ahead, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.